According to the United States National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, over 600,000 people are reported missing every year. There are approximately 6.5 missing persons for every 100,000. As a general rule, the overwhelming majority of these incidents are resolved and in a timely manner. Some are never solved, some are suspicious, and for a minority of cases, the circumstances become unusual and confuse those involved. Let's explore some of them. Jeanette Federer was 6 years old when she disappeared from a lonely, remote ranch 10 miles northwest of Cheyenne, Wyoming on the 30th of September 1948. This is very much prairie country. There was very little way of forest areas or trees, and most of the surrounding vegetation was that of grass, herbs, and shrubs. At the time of her disappearance, she was playing in the garden with both of the family dogs, and this was a frequent thing that she would do given the relative safety of the area. It's not an area where you would ever expect to see another person outside of your own family. It seems that on this particular day, Jeanette's mother was running a couple of errands inside the home while Jeanette was outside in the garden, and the mother would come check up on her in between these errands. Jeanette was outside from around dinner time at 12:30 p.m. At 1 p.m, when the mother came out to check on her, she was gone along with both of the dogs. It's important to note right off the bat that this was unusual because Jeanette had never left the property before like this and always stayed inside the garden. The mother left the property and began to call loudly for both Jeanette and the dogs, but there was no reply. No barks, no sign of Jeanette or the dogs anywhere. Obviously, I'm sure you can imagine the absolute state of panic that must have been felt now, and the mother quickly called for help. The scale of this search was absolutely enormous and it gained steam rapidly. This was reported the day after the incident. An entire battalion of soldiers, a total of 800 men, participated in a search for Jeanette, missing since yesterday. Her parents said the child wandered from the yard of their home. Colonel J.C.B. Elliott, commander at Fort Warren, called out the soldiers last night to assist Cheyenne Police and State Highway Patrol in searching the prairie lands. Without the battalion of soldiers that joined, there were already 200 individuals involved in the search. So now, around 1,000 men and women spanned out for miles in every direction, but they didn't find any trace of her. Later that night, one of the dogs arrived back home and was let back into the house, which of course gave hope to the family and searchers. However, they noticed something odd. The dog went into their living room and didn't want to come back out. They were hoping that the dog would lead them to Jeanette, but from what I can understand, the dog just didn't want to leave the house again. It was that until this point, people began to think that she and the dogs may have been taken. Though the family said that the dogs would bark at strangers, and of course that never happened. A man who I believe was local to the area, a flying instructor by the name of Jack Strong, said he'd had enough and was going to sweep the entire area in his small plane. This aerial search would be successful, but not without some surprise. A black dog which guarded Jeanette Federer through a cold, rainy night led an aerial searcher to the 6-year-old girl today. Huddled against a creek bank on the prairie just over 10 miles from her ranch home, Jeanette was found by Jack Strong. He spotted the large shepherd dog and landed nearby. At first, the dog was determined to keep me from the child, but she spoke his name and he let me touch her, Strong said. She was too cold, hungry and frightened to say much, but there wasn't a whimper from her. Strong flew her to the home of her anxious parents and she was taken to hospital, suffering from exposure, scratches and bruises. Jeanette wandered away from home 12 miles northwest of Cheyenne, accompanied by her 2 dogs. Before being found, Jeanette had been missing for 20 hours, and searchers stated that they were amazed that she managed to walk over 12 miles away in that time through the long grass and the shrubbery. They said that they weren't sure how she'd managed to do that. Unfortunately, that unusual aspect of this disappearance was given incredibly short shrift, and it wasn't mentioned again. Jeanette herself was confused and dazed, and she didn't end up saying much about the entire ordeal, or at least nothing that was actually reported on in the press. I can understand the surprise of the searchers to some degree, because you're talking about a 6-year-old who in 20 hours had walked around 12 miles, or just over half a mile non-stop for every hour that she'd been missing. The paper trail basically ended there, and it's not really clear what had happened here. Did she just wander away all that distance with her dogs? Maybe, but it sure took the searchers by surprise. What do you think? Teresa Schmidt was 53 years old when she disappeared while hiking near the Lost Valley Ranch in Jefferson County, Colorado. Teresa and her husband lived in Avon, Indiana, but had decided to go on a vacation together to the ranch, which is located within the Pike National Forest. Teresa was an avid hiker who loved the outdoors and as such was quite a fit person. She told her husband that she was going to go hiking near Cheeseman Reservoir just a couple of miles away for a few hours before dinner. However, Teresa would never return, and after the 2 hours had elapsed, the husband became concerned. He waited just a little longer before reporting this to the authorities. Law enforcement came quickly, and soon there was a group of 70 searchers that began to scour the area, alongside search dogs and helicopters. There had been a pretty bad wildfire in this area sometime before Teresa and her husband arrived, so there wasn't much in the way of foliage at the time, and the ground was soft and ashy along the length of her route. This search lasted for just shy of a week, and Teresa was never found. The owners of the ranch said that the trail she took narrows into treacherous terrain that is steep with large boulders. And strangely, despite the search starting soon after the disappearance and heading into this area, no sign of her was found. Teresa's husband spent several days searching by motorcycle. Search efforts were hampered by inclement weather, and the only thing anyone located was 2 sets of Teresa's footprints near Cheeseman Overlook, one set on each side of the ridge. The sets of footprints each petered out as she moved away from the ridge, and no further evidence was ever found. There doesn't seem to be any official conclusion that was drawn here, at least as far as I can tell. The owners of the ranch suggested that a mountain lion may have gotten to her, but the searchers stated that there was just no sign of animal predation in the area anywhere. Other than the footprints she left behind at that ridge, there was nothing. It's as if she manoeuvred herself around the boulders, got to that ridge, and disappeared into thin air. Alpine Search and Rescue said that she was the 3rd person in 50 years who has disappeared in this area and has never been found. I didn't have time to look into the other 2, but if I can find them, I'll include them in the next video. Now, let's explore the next disappearance. Joan Iceman was 28 years old when she disappeared from the outskirts of Homedale, Idaho, towards the end of October 1953. On the 22nd of that month, Joan and her husband, Richard, who was the Owyhee County prosecuting attorney, had gone to the cinema together, and afterwards had stopped by a club on the way home. After spending some time in the club and talking to their friends, they drove home. As they arrived at around 1 AM, Richard went into the home and Joan was supposed to follow him in. Except, after a few minutes had passed, he realised that she just wasn't around anymore. Joan was said to get restless sometimes and would go for late night walks along Snake River or in the countryside, which was just behind their home. though he said that he didn't believe that she would just leave without telling him. They were both said to be in good spirits that night and had a fun time, and members of the club said that she was happy, laughing, and that there didn't seem to be any problems. There were 3 scenarios that were being explored, all surrounding the river or a walk by it. The first being that perhaps this was intentional and Joan meant to disappear, or worse. The second being that she had accidentally fallen in, or the third being foul play in the moments after Richard entered the home, leaving her alone. The intentional act hypothesis was disregarded early on, as there was just no evidence left behind to point in that direction. Richard, their children, along with neighbours, friends and family, all stated that she was a generally positive person that was in good health. Mystery still surrounds the disappearance today, as volunteers scoured the surrounding countryside and dragged Snake River. It is feared that she may have drowned in the Snake River, which flows near the couple's home. The whole town has turned out in what has so far proved to be a vain search. Men began dragging the river Thursday and continued all day yesterday. Today, they were working as far as 14 miles downstream. The search was extensive and people were constantly walking up and down the riverbanks, and many boats were in the river itself, along with people all over the countryside. The Owyhee County Sheriff's Office said contacts with Joan's relatives and friends failed to produce a single clue. A check of the buses leaving Homedale also drew a blank. Officers said their investigation still has produced no evidence of foul play. It seems that around 5 days into the search, foul play began to be the primary suspicion, as nothing was turning up. It was also stated that while Joan did go for walks near the river, she was never stood up against the edge next to the running water. As the search went into its 5th day, there was growing fear that she may have been the victim of foul play. Others thought that the young mother may have had amnesia and simply wandered away. I couldn't find any further mention of the hypothesis surrounding amnesia, but given that was reported as a possibility, you have to imagine that she may have experienced something along those lines in the past. Otherwise, I'm not sure why it'd even be said here. The search grew even larger on this day, and now many planes were constantly flying overhead, and hundreds of people were still scouring the countryside surrounding their home. Whatever happened to Joan, she had left no trace behind at all. There was no sign of a disturbance or a struggle anywhere, and they weren't able to identify any footprints either, despite the area being somewhat wet and muddy at the time, which I suppose might be a little odd. Of course, we don't have specific context, but I'm not sure how you just wander away and not leave any indentations or anything behind if the ground was as reported. In any case, the paper would go on to state, as the days went by, officers began to doubt that her body will be found in the river. Joan was an expert swimmer, and the riverbank slopes away gradually in the neighbourhood of her home. Speaking more of that night, Joan and Richard had a drink or two and a bowl of chili. People who saw them said everything seemed to be okay. One man, though, told officers that Joan seemed to be upset. She almost knocked the door down getting out. From there, the couple went home. After going indoors, it was about 1 AM. After a few minutes when Joan hadn't entered, he went back outside to find that she was gone. There, the trail ends, as abruptly as if the prosecutor's wife had vanished into thin air. If Joan has been the victim of foul play, or simply of amnesia, the search may well lead into the vast desert that stretches for hundreds of miles south and west of the town. This desert was also extensively searched as suspicions of foul play began to spread through the searchers and law enforcement. They never found anything in the desert, but they did tell hunters around this area to keep an eye open for her. On the 30th, a potential clue was finally found in the river. As authorities were patrolling Snake River, they saw what was reported as a pink-clad object in the water, but not long after seeing this in the water, the weather began to worsen, which was just awful timing. The search was hindered by strong winds and rain, and sight of the object was lost. It's unclear whether the pink-clad object was Joan or not, but some days later, on the 5th of November, a man called Roy Harrington saw a body in the water around 50 miles away from the initial disappearance point. Upon recovery of the body, the autopsy revealed that she hadn't been injured and that there were no signs of foul play, and that in all likelihood she had drowned. An attempt was then made to figure out where she might have entered the water, but this couldn't be established. There was nowhere that was deemed obvious, and they never found tracks leading anywhere. The incident was concluded by deeming it as an accident officially, but unofficially, many of the searchers themselves, family, and the locals had their doubts. It seems that the effort to identify the point of entering the water may have been an attempt to quell these doubts, but as said, it was never established. While her body may have been found, the circumstances leading up to her ending up in the river were never fully explained. The paper trail also ends there, so let's have a look at a final disappearance that I covered over 2 years ago that fits well in this criteria. To be honest with you, I don't even know where to start with this one, and we're going to have to get bizarre pretty much immediately here. 25-year-old Teresa Hoffman lived with her parents and brother on her father's farm. On the 24th of August 1953, Teresa had planned to go berry picking with her mother and one of her cousins on said farm. Whilst they were picking berries, they became separated and the family couldn't locate Teresa again. Frank Hoffman, the father, organised their own search which ultimately failed, and the family were left confused, having no idea where she could have gone to. It's important to clarify that at the time of disappearance, the mother nor the cousin heard anything to suggest that something was wrong, and during this search, Teresa never responded to the family's calls. At this point, Frank contacted the sheriff's office, who arrived on scene fairly promptly. It's worth mentioning here that the search for Teresa was actually massive in scale, with over 2,000 people arriving on the farm. Of these 2,000 individuals, we had officials from the sheriff's department, professional search and rescuers, other police officers, search dog teams, and many volunteers. The entire search was fruitless, and no trace of Teresa was turning up at all. I imagine this was quite a bewildering and confusing experience for all concerned here, as it appeared that Teresa had literally vanished into thin air. Now, I promised you bizarre, so here it is. On the 3rd of October 1953, the Norwich Sun reported this. A 25-year-old woman who disappeared while berry picking on the 24th of August returned to her home here last night. State police said Teresa Hoffman was found by her brother Henry in a woodshed on the farm where they live. Police said that she was in good health but could not remember where she'd been during her time missing. More than 2,000 men searched the woods and hills in this Cattaraugus County community for the missing woman. What? So Teresa went missing on the 24th of August without a trace, and she was now found on the 3rd of October, in good health other than complete memory loss as to what had happened or where she'd been. Where do you even start with this? That's the end of the paper trail, by the way. The journalist reporting didn't seem to have any questions about that, as if it was completely normal. How is that not an area of interest that you might want to poke some questions at? I don't really know what to say here, other than it seems to me that there are various questions that need answering. Was she still on the farm or in the woodshed the entire time of the search? How did she manage to evade 2,000 searchers and dogs here? Did she have any injuries at all? Was she eating during this time? She surely must have had access to water and food. The sheriff stated that she was in good health other than experiencing memory loss in regards to what had happened. I can only imagine that there must have been some odd conversations surrounding this in the sheriff's office. What's equally surprising to me is the short shrift that the press seemed to give Teresa's disappearance. I really wish there was more information on this or a follow-up, but that seems to be everything I can find. I've had to come back and edit this in, but I actually found this reported by the Saranac Lake Daily Enterprise. Unfortunately, it looks like there's been a bad photocopy job here, but the title says that she lost 10 days while they acknowledge that she disappeared on the 24th of August. And obviously, the date at this stage is the 3rd of October. I can only imagine that there was more to this post that provides some extra context, perhaps a statement from Teresa. But I'm going to have to leave this one there because I just don't know, but felt it should be included here. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around and disappearing on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe if you haven't already. If not, then feel free to leave a dislike. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.